Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dissecting Fiction podcast. I'm Vinny Murphy.
And I'm Christian Cutlet.
And today we have a very special guest. He is the former brand manager of Masters of the Universe Classics, DC Universe Classics, a bunch of other lines that are very significant. You may know him as the ToyGuru. Today we have Scott Neitlich on the show. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing great. And hey, you got my last name right.
This is whenever anyone says anything like this on our show, we always are accurate. I made sure to note exactly how to say it. I listened to you say it on your Spector Creative YouTube channel, and I was like, I am not messing up this man's name.
It's a tough one. That's how I know whether or not it's a solicitor on the phone. So, you know.
So, Scott, you are very much a storyteller on multiple levels, but how did you get into the toy business?
So, and thank you guys for having me, by the way.
You're very welcome.
To be on the show.
Yeah, we're very excited to have you.
So, let's see. So, right after college, well, actually, I should back up. I grew up, I was born in Connecticut, moved to California in third grade, and a big part of living in California, every time we lived down in Orange County, which is an hour south of Los Angeles. And every time we drove up to Los Angeles for, visiting friends or whatever, many reasons to go to Los Angeles, we would always pass by the giant Hawthorne Mattel headquarters, which was literally right off the freeway. And you would pass it, and it was a giant red brick building, and there was a huge Mattel logo on the side. So as, a 10-year-old kid, you're seeing this. It's like, oh my gosh, there's a toy company right here. Wow. So that was definitely, big reason, big kind of, maybe not influence, but like a spark, if you will, growing up in Southern California. And I really never stopped being into toys, even after, as I became a teenager and went to college, I was still what we now call an adult collector. I don't think we had the term back then, but it's kind of evolved over the last 25 years. And after college, I went to college. I wanted to become a screenwriter. I majored in film studies and communication at UC Santa Barbara. I double majored with an emphasis with film, with screenwriting and communication and persuasion. And I thought I was going to go into writing TV commercials for advertising agencies. I figured that was going to be a great career. And my first job out of college, I got a job as a bottom level or entry level writer at an ad agency. It was actually a medical advertising agency. So we wrote medical copy for medical ads and paraphernalia that reps would bring to doctors. Did that for about 4 years. I could tell you more about glaucoma than you ever wanted to know. And the whole time I was kind of applying to Mattel, trying to get my foot in the door. And eventually, through a whole set of circumstances, actually involving being at San Diego Comic-Con and talking to some personnel there and having my portfolio, I wound up getting an interview to be a writer on the Hot Wheels team. And what I wasn't expecting was the skill set of writing medical advertising is very transferable to toy copywriting because of being able to navigate kind of all the legal mumbo jumbo, all the, the choking hazards versus the adverse effects, that kind of thing. So they saw that skill set as very transferable. And that was how I got my foot in the door in the toy industry. I got my first job writing copy for basic cars and track sets in Hot Wheels.
So how do you make that jump from the Hot Wheels line into, what would become sort of the adult collector's lines at Mattel? I mean, almost exclusively adult, I would say, probably outside of the DC stuff.
So to not make it too long of a story, basically, there I am as a entry-level copywriter for Mattel. And while it was amazing because I was so into toys, I was much more of an action figure guy than a Hot Wheels guy. And, 2 cubicles over or 2 rows over is the team working on action figures. Specifically, they just finished up the 2000X He-Man line. Eventually, the general manager of Mattel, who's Tim Kilpin, he's not with the company anymore, but he'd been with the company for 30 years. He was the brand manager on the original He-Man line back in the 80s. And he did kind of a in the trenches meeting where he met with all of the different teams to see, what are your day-to-day issues? Like, as general manager, I'd love to know if there's things I could be helping you with. And I'm in the packaging group, so most of the people are saying, oh, we're having trouble with blisters, or we can't get e-flute, that's a type of paper, or the die cut machine that our vendor's using is screwing up this and that. And in the back of the room, I raise my hand and say, why doesn't Mattel make adult collector action figures for He-Man? And he looks at me like, okay, that's completely off subject and not what I'm here to talk about, but interesting point. Why don't you make an appointment with my receptionist and we'll see if we can talk about that, because that's actually interesting. I used to work on He-Man, which of course I knew going in that. I'd done my research. So it took about 4 months before I had time on his calendar, but I finally got in there and I brought literally like a egg crate full of stuff, including NECA Staction figures for MOTU, for He-Man, some Indiana Jones figures I bought at Disneyland, some figures from some Image Comics titles like Savage Dragon and Spawn and things like that, and kind of made my pitch to him that, as a collector, I was spending between $100 and $200 a month on action figures, and almost none of that was going to Mattel, my own company. And, I showed him Marvel Legends, which, it's Toy Biz at the time, and basically said, look, we have really strong brands like He-Man, and we have the license for Batman, Superman. I think that we could do a very strong collector business. And he liked my pitch. They moved me from the writing group to the marketing group in Action Play, which is the action figure group. Literally gave me a fold-out table and a 1977 computer in the corner of the room, like I was shoved up against the wall. But, I was so glad to be there. And after about 90 days, we put together a business plan for what became Matty Collector and kicked it off with some Comic-Con items. And it took off. It wound up, exceeding all expectations and wound up being kind of a hobby brand for me for the next 10 years.
Yeah, Matty Collector itself, once again, for our listeners who aren't, super into collecting, was really at the forefront of the online marketplace for collectors, which is now essentially, right now, almost all that exists, and really incredibly influential on how adult collectibles are marketed to the consumer. When we talk about Matty Collector, the initial thing I think of is that subscription system where you had, people locked in for a period, voluntarily to get these figures. And I can't remember a single time that I ever heard one of my friends complaining about it. It was always an exciting thing because you were waiting for that next figure to come, as opposed to, fighting like people have been with Target the last couple of months.
Oh, I'm doing that right now. I got to Target last week, and they had the leftovers of the new Deadpool wave from Marvel Legends. No, somebody got here before me.
It's tough with all internet right now. But Matty Collector, I always felt, was pretty reliable on that. And one of the things that it allowed, you to do, and for the consumers to enjoy, was really keep a consistent level of product coming out. And especially in the case of Masters of the Universe Classics, kind of craft the story as the toys were coming out.
Yeah, I'm also a big believer in, and this probably works really great for you guys, for your podcast, the idea of toys as a medium to tell stories. Most people look at toys as a marketing vehicle, which I actually wrote my senior thesis in college on this. It was on the idea of, it was the history of toys being a marketing tool to push movies, like Star Wars and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves and Rocky, who had toys in the 80s all the way up through what happens now where everybody wants a toy. And the idea that a major movie coming out would use toys at, much like they would use T-shirts or being on a bag of Doritos or something, as a way to market the movie. From my perspective, I always saw toys themselves not as a consumer product, but as if familiar with the concept, the medium is the message. and the idea that toys themselves can tell a story. And good examples of that are like, well, my go-to example is the He-Man character I created, Mighty Spector. Not to ring his bell too much, but one of the things I very deliberately had done to this figure, this was a character I got to create, was he has an ammo belt around his ankle or his thigh, and I told the Horseman very deliberately to remove two of the clips, basically, to like not have it be full. And the idea was that was because one of them was in his gun at that time. So it's a very small thing, but it's using the toy to actually tell a story. Like a battle damaged Spider-Man is another good example. He's obviously been through, heck with, wrestling with the Green Goblin or Venom or something. So that really blended over into the work I did on Masters of the Universe Classics, because we didn't have a cartoon and we didn't have a movie and we didn't even have a comic book or anything. We had basically no content. And usually you need content to support a toy line. So I was basically using the toys themselves as their own content. And anything I could use, be it a print ad or a bio or a reveal at a convention, to publicize the line. And so, yeah, the toys became, sort of like the snake eating its tail, where the toys themselves were the content. And the interaction with the fans, the daily, answering questions or, going online and talking to fans was the support for the brand itself, was actually just engaging about the toys. So, yeah, that was kind of always my thoughts.
Yeah, and on your Spector Creative YouTube channel, which I've really been enjoying, it's part of the reason that we even reached out to you, is seeing how much you discuss the storytelling of toys on that channel. You talk about how like every file card, anything you could get in there, you would. Eventually, you do get those mini comics back, which Christian's a little younger than I am, and I'm just slightly too young to have caught Masters of the Universe on shelves. But when I was a kid, I used to go to, any yard sale or anything, grab them secondhand. And if I could track down a mini comic, that was like the best, because then I knew what was going on. And, those mini comics always had that edge that the cartoon didn't have. And I think you guys really continued that.
You mean with the mini comics we did for Classics?
Yeah, and all of the story work done on those packages.
Yeah, I mean, we looked with Classics as a toy line. I was heavily looking at, because, well, one, we didn't have rights to Filmation in the beginning, so we essentially had to look at all the other content that we did have rights to, which included things like the mini comics, things like the 1987 style guide Mattel put out, which was great because it had like 4-sentence bios for almost every character, including the She-Ra characters. And those sentences usually wound up literally getting incorporated word for word into the bios. So, yeah, we were basically, that was it. We didn't have access to the content of both Filmation or, the Dolph Lundgren, Gary Goddard film or any of that at the beginning. Eventually, we got access to those things, or some of them. But, yeah, it was all about maximizing the content that was out there and, really playing it up and, putting in lots of Easter eggs for the fans.
And you were partnered on the writing with Tim Seeley, who even since then has become bigger and bigger within the comic book industry. How was that process with him?
So the original mini comics, the first mini comics we did a total of 8, right? Am I doing the math right? The first 3 were, so the brand launched in 2008 with the King Grayskull figure, and we didn't get to mini comics until 2012. So we had 4 years of nothing, just bios. The mini comics we did in 2012, and I will answer your question about Tim, of course, that was basically because we got a gift for the 30th anniversary of non-media from management. Essentially, we were running Matty Collector, just a little backstory and as background, everything with Matty Collector, that wasn't my job at Mattel. My job was working on DC Universe Classics and the Green Lantern theatrical movie, and eventually Hot Wheels Star Wars. What I was doing on Matty Collector was literally Mattel was kind enough to basically let me run that as long as I was willing to do that in addition to my regular job. So we didn't have it was sort of a below the line brand. Like it was years before we even had like an official financial target, meaning an amount of money we were supposed to make for the company. We were basically just, if we made some money, that was great. And as long as we didn't have excess stock or, was causing problems, the company was fine with us running it. And the reason for this background is because that also meant we had no non-media, which means money used to advertise the line, which is why, I was doing things like writing bios or revealing figures online. That didn't cost anything, at least just my time. So in 2012, for the 30th anniversary, management gave us a very small chunk of change, to try to promote the brand for the 30th. And I realized that we could use all that money to produce 3 mini comics. And we're like, okay, that's what we're going to do with this money. We're going to finish the original Powers of Grayskull story from the vintage comics or vintage toys that was supposed to be a 3-part story. The first issue said, part 1 of 3 of a 3-part saga, but part 2 and 3 never happened. So we thought that'd be a great thing to do for the 30th, is to finally finish that story. So we contacted Dark Horse Comics to help produce them, and they were the ones who suggested Tim. He had done a He-Man spoof comic called, I believe, Colt Noble. I hope I'm not butchering this, which is really funny. Everyone should pick it up. It's totally it's a spoof of Masters of the Universe. It's hilarious. So Dark Horse recommended him, and we basically I gave him an outline for the story, what beats we wanted to cover, and he cleaned it up and wrote all the dialogue, and then would send it back, and we had a couple notes. We'd have like certain things we needed to be mentioned or things not mentioned, et cetera, et cetera. But it was, he was a huge fan. It was great to work with him. I met him several times in person at conventions. We're still friends today. And that's how we got. It was basically because of his Colt Noble spoof comic that Dark Horse recommended him, and that's how it all started.
I get the feeling that he's a pretty big toy fan too, considering his pretty extensive work on G.I. Joe as well.
Yeah. I mean, he's toys, pop culture, 80s stuff. I mean, that's his cup of tea.
Was there a story that you wanted to tell in Masters of the Universe Classics that you didn't get to tell?
Well, I mean, a big one that I did get to tell was that whole origin of Skeletor. When we did the first 3 mini comics, I thought that was it. Like, those 3, we'll never be able to afford to do another one. So the fact that we got to that 4th one, which was the origin of Skeletor, was a real joy. As far as stories not told, I did a video on this on my Spector Creative YouTube channel, if people want to check it out, where I talk about how the mini comics, the storyline, just the whole storyline that was fleshed out by the mini comics and bios, was designed to shadow or mimic the way a retail toy line would work, in correlation with a TV show. So if you looked at the 2000X series, which Classics basically picked that up where it left off, I also did a video. You can check out the video about that as well. It was the idea that every season, an animated series that's supporting a toy line has to kind of reinvent itself in terms of a theme, bad guys, and then that's going to bleed over into how the physical toy line reinvents itself. So, and I will, you had a specific question. This is background to it. I will answer it. So if you look at the 2000X series, the first year was red carded figures called Masters of the Universe. And the first season was essentially He-Man and the Masters versus Skeletor and the Evil Warriors. The second season became rebranded as Masters of the Universe versus the Snake Men, both as far as physical product, which got a green package at retail, and the animated series got a brand new villain in the form of King Hiss and the Snake Men, who eventually defeated Skeletor within the episodes that they did make. And you'll see this with tons of toy lines. I mean, Star Wars is a great example. The way every season it gets new packaging, because that's something you have to do for retail in order to both get rid of old figures and also just keep customers engaged so they know something is new. You rarely see, maybe something like the Star Wars Black series is a example that hasn't changed that much as far as packaging, but almost every other toy line changes every year. All right. So with the background, your question of what story didn't I get to tell, I really, treating them that way, we finished off with the very last panel of the very last mini comic was Dare, son of He-Man, battling with Skeletine, son of Skeletor, who were both vintage characters from the 87 concept for that spin-off show that never happened. I really wanted to get to that story and the idea of moving the brand forward. And a lot of fans, I think, even pushed back on this because, for them, He-Man was He-Man versus Skeletor and nothing else. I mean, of course, you could have Hordak and King Hiss show up, but the core of it was He-Man versus Skeletor. So the idea that we were going to move forward to their kids, for me, that was really important because it was moving the brand forward. If you wanted to see He-Man versus Skeletor, there's 2 animated series, one that was over 130 episodes, and, years of, stuff in the 80s all about that. So that was kind of where I was trying to get to with the brand, was to finally move it forward to the next generation and continue to tell the stories. But all we really got was one panel in the final 8th issue that kind of hinted as what was to come. So that was where we were going, and where I would have loved to keep them going if there was a 9th issue.
Yeah, and those mini comics were all a ton of fun. For our listeners, if you're interested in checking out some of those mini comics, Dark Horse actually put out like an excellent hardcover that takes even the earlier mini comics and gets up to. I guess it gets through the powers of Grayskull. It does not get to the Skeleton stuff, I don't believe.
Yeah, it's only the first 3 Masters of the Universe Classics minis, because after that they were done with DC.
Ah, okay.
Which I don't know why they couldn't reprint those, but yeah. So they just printed the first 3 that were for the 30th anniversary that Tim wrote off of my plot, and then the 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 were done through DC Comics.
Which is right, because that was the original home for He-Man, I believe.
Yep. It was absolutely, it was, yes, and they actually did the second series of mini comics back in the 80s. The first 4 were done by Mattel, and then after that, the next 10 were done by DC, along with some actual full-size comic books that DC did.
And as Scott was saying, he goes into great detail about a lot of these stories on his Spector Creative YouTube channel, so do check that out. One last question on Masters of the Universe, because I have to ask, it seems like Masters of the Universe is kind of blowing up again. Have you gotten, any feedback from fans about trying to resurrect the Classics line?
I've gotten lots of fans telling me how much they love Classics and wish it didn't have to end. At the end of the day, I haven't worked for Mattel in almost 10 years, I think, at this point, and, give or take a few years. So it's really that kind of energy would have to go to Mattel. I mean, if they called me up today and said, "Hey, we want to bring back Classics and we'd love for you to help," I would say, sure, I'll talk to you. That's actually what my company does. Spector Creative I'm a consultant for toy companies to help develop product and develop storylines and content. So, I would love to see Classics comes back, but that's not in my power to do at this time.
I know that Christian and I are both aware of that, but I asked because you were so connected to that brand with your videos and, your presence at conventions that I just imagine that most people would probably go right to you to ask.
I mean, they do. And I say, you got to talk to Mattel. Unfortunately, I couldn't have done that without Mattel's support. I mean, obviously, it was great that Mattel basically let me run that brand as long as I was willing to do it on top of my regular job. And that's, I think, why I basically wanted to treat the fans the way I wanted toy companies, as a collector myself, the way I wanted to be treated was, be connected, to be talked to have, as open information as possible. And that's really where all that came from, was just doing what I wanted to get myself.
Yeah, and it was always pretty evident how much you were out there to please the fans in that era. It was a cool time in that industry, and our listeners who have listened to our episode about ToyStoreGuide.com, where we ended up talking about all different toys, know that my favorite toy line of all time is DC Universe Classics. So I have to ask a few questions. Don't worry, I'm not going to bother you about the fact that I still don't have a Gentleman Ghost or a Legion 12-pack. I'm not going to bother you about it. I'm not bringing it up.
Believe me, we can talk about that, but go ahead. Please, go ahead.
No, I don't blame you. I saw your video on Spector Creative about how it was not short pack. I believe you. But what I do want to ask is, you have these two lines are running at the same time. Masters of the Universe, as we just discussed, you had a lot of control sort of over the narrative of, what was happening in the toy line. DC is almost the opposite. You're kind of going with something that someone else has done entirely. What was sort of your philosophy on character choice because of that? What were you looking to get out to the public? Because, you weren't controlling what was going on in the comics.
So essentially, the first year that we did DC Universe Classics, and so this was when we'd basically gotten the master license from Warner Brothers DC. Previously, we only had the license, and I mean Mattel, to do Superman and Batman family of characters. So this all new contract gave us the rights to do pretty much everyone in the DC universe. Obviously we weren't going to do Captain Nazi or characters like that, but we basically had access to everyone pending approval. And that's actually key right there, is pending approval. Everything had to go through Warner Brothers and DC for review, from character selection to, bio copy on the back, to our slides at Comic-Con. Working on Masters of the Universe Classics was a lot easier because there were fewer stakeholders, if you will, between idea and product. And I'm not knocking it. I mean, of course, you have to involve the IP holders, but it basically just meant it took longer to get sort of anything done just because you had to involve, there were more checkpoints along the way that you had to go through. So that first year that we had the new contract to have the full DC universe, Warner Brothers and DC literally gave us the lineup. So that was, I think, the first 6 waves. And I talk about this in a lot of in the director's commentaries on my channel on Spector Creative on YouTube, because I go wave by wave. And if you look at wave 1 through 6, I talk about how each of those waves were, for lack of a better word, literally drawn out, dictated by Warner and DC. And part of that was they wanted a Batman and or a Superman in every single wave. And they basically, I think we may have a few questions or some not pushbacks, but said, oh, could we do this version of this character instead or this? But for the most part, the first year was just us making the toys they told us to make. By the second year, we had really evolved in our relationship with them, and they kind of got that the people working on the brand. So I was the brand manager. That was actually my job. When I was brought over to the marketing group while I worked on, pitching Matty Collector was kind of my ticket in. It was basically, aligning of the stars that Mattel had also gotten this new license, and they knew I knew a lot about comic book characters. So when I transferred over, it was basically like, hey, Scott, while you're putting together this proposal for what became Matty Collector, could you also run the DC Universe line? And I was like, could I? Are you kidding? Absolutely. I would love, it was basically my enthusiasm to do it, which is why I went up doing the job of four people, working on way too many lines. I kind of didn't realize that till after I left Mattel. So by that second year, it built up enough trust, and Warner Brothers knew that the people working on the line, and not just me, but the Four Horsemen, Bill Beneke, who was the lead designer, Jason Langston and Frank Varela in packaging, we were all big, huge DC fans and toy fans. So Warner and DC kind of got that we knew what we were doing, and that trust level was there. And as time went by, they basically gave us more and more freedom to create the waves ourselves. Everything would have to get run by them for approval, but instead of them telling us, okay, wave 1 will have these 6 characters, we were basically able to give them a year and say, okay, these are the 6 waves we want to do. Here are all the characters, and we would basically get very few changes. Every once in a while they'd say, oh, can you do this version instead? Or, this is a character that we're really going to be pushing in the comic. Could you add them in? But it was like 80% approved on delivery. So that was great.
Scott, I know you were the brand manager for, you said the majority of the line a few times on the Spector Creative videos I've watched. I would assume that Wave 21 was not what was one you were not involved with.
Was 21 the Necron Wave?
21 is there's a no Build-A-Figure wave, and it's New 52 Superman, New 52 Batman, I think Red Robin, and Superboy Prime.
Okay, so I worked on the first 19 waves then.
Okay.
So Necron, who I think was wave 20, was the first wave I didn't work on. I'd moved over to, I think, working on Hot Wheels Star Wars at that point, or I might have been more working on some of the DC movies, like Man of Steel, Green Lantern, Dark Knight, that kind of thing.
Okay. So, Mick, I do have a question kind of about the end of that line, though, and I think you probably still would be able to answer it. I've always wondered, as the line was aging and they were moving closer to the New 52, was there an opportunity to do anything from Wildstorm or Vertigo? I know that I know you're a big Savage Dragons fan, so I would think that those early Image characters might be something that you're also into, and I couldn't imagine, like, picturing like a DC Universe Classics Grifter in my head is just like the coolest thing.
Oh man, I mean, I'm actually putting a Wildcats issue right here on top of my comic book pile next to my desk. I was a bit, not just when Image first came out, like those first few years, I was like all in. I only kind of Dragon sort of just became my favorite because that was the only one that lasted with the original creator. But yeah, like those first 13 issues that Jim and Scott did were like, I love them. Playmates did those figures, but yeah, they're not exactly Marvel Legends, DC Universe Classics quality in scale or articulation. So I know we were talking with DC about integrating both of those. We've had success with things like Watchmen, where originally we were told absolutely not, we could not do Watchmen figures. I actually tried to do them in the first year of DCU Classics. I wanted to do one Watchmen figure per wave. And that was something DC said, no, like that's not part of the contract. Eventually, we did get access to them, and we did them on Matty Collector. So, yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes, Vertigo and Wildstorm were absolutely both, like, I would say, on the table to discuss. We hadn't been granted full rights to do them, but Warner and DC were aware that we had interest in doing them, and they were open to having that discussion. And then I left the team and went over to Hot Wheels Star Wars, and then the new team, I guess just kind of didn't pick up the ball with that.
It's interesting, and the reason we asked, just to contextualize this for those who don't know, the line was winding down going into 2011, 2012, which is when the New 52 had really was taking hold, as we talk about in one of our other podcasts. And those characters were pretty much all reintegrated into the DCU. So it's been something that I've been thinking about for a lot of years. Even when that was happening, the comics were starting to get that. I was like, oh man, are we going to get really good Mattel Wildstorm figures? And not yet. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I would have loved. I mean, I would have loved the whole Wild. I mean, I would have done 1992 Wildcats if I had my choice. I mean, yeah, Grifter, Spartan, Voodoo, Void, Zealot, the whole 9 yards. But I know there was also a lot of push from Warner and DC to do the New 52 versions of everyone once the New 52 was kind of taking. I know eventually it almost got reversed after a few years, and the classic versions were brought back. But at that time, and that was probably why Wave 21 was what it was I think it was kind of back to being dictated by Warner DC, because they wanted to focus on that as the new face of the brand and not the classic versions of the characters, which I understand from their perspective. That made total sense.
And your involvement with DC didn't end there, correct? You went on to work on the micro figures.
The ones at Jada?
Yes.
Yes. So when I eventually wound up at Jada, they were doing metal figures that were kind of a Funko Pop in metal in a way. They'd just done them for Batman versus Superman, and was the Justice League movie. Oh, and I know like Suicide Squad, and then they had a few other licensed Ninja Turtles, Ghostbusters, but the size, it was doing well, but it wasn't doing gangbusters. And so what became the Nano line, so that actually started on my desk. I had, and actually I'm looking at them right now because they're still in my toy room, my office, the Kenner 1980 Star Wars metal figures, the mini metal figures, the Microverse, I think they called it. So I had a handful of those and basically brought them in to the president of the company and said, look, our core capacity is doing metal, doing diecast. I think that this scale would be great for everything, for all of pop culture. And if we could get it to 99 cents per figure, that basically creates the 99-cent action figure to compete with Hot Wheels as a 99-cent vehicle. And he absolutely loved the idea. And it's probably the most, I would say, support I ever had from management to do something immediately. Almost everything I would say I ever pitched was like, okay, well, we'll think about that next season. Or we need to run some data. We need to do some, testing first. But this was like immediate. He was like, oh my gosh, absolutely. He grabbed them. He said, I'm going to China next week. I'm going to take these right to our vendor and cost them out. And I was unbelievably amazed at how supportive Jada was at doing that new scale, literally right off of me just walking in and saying, hey, I think we should do this. And the president agreed. And they're still doing it. I see they just put out some Dungeons and Dragons figures. And that's, that was really, that was actually the hardest part of walking away from Jada when I left. Was I really loved working on that micro line, and it was my baby. And that was the hard part about when I left Jada on my own. But it's great that it's still going.
Yeah, I know they're always cool to see those lines, especially all the different paint variants, things like that. Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about Spector Creative right now, what you're up to, and let the people know about your social media channels, etc.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, so social media, I'm at Spector Creative or hashtag Spector Creative on Twitter and Instagram, although I don't use them as much as I probably should. I'm working on that. My main social media is on YouTube, where I have a channel named after my company, Spector Creative, where I do videos basically about both recapping my time in the toy industry. In some cases, with things like Masters of the Universe Classics, I have a series where I go literally figure by figure, doing what I call director's commentary, and basically doing like a 10 to 15 minute video per figure, or in the case of DC Universe Classics, per wave, where I just kind of give my history of how that wave and or figure came to be, and any funny stories or any interesting tidbits about the figure, the accessories, or just about that figure. And then in addition, I've got a ton of videos just kind of about the toy industry in general and things that I basically created them because I felt like, well, nobody on YouTube is talking about this stuff. Things like one of the first videos I did was just about how an action figure is made physically, the tooling process. People always hear people talking about, that the tooling costs too much. What the heck is tooling? So I started by doing a video on that, and it sort of just bloomed into doing videos on everything from production numbers to how paint ops work to case packs to why female action figures don't sell as well. And then I also teach hieroglyphics because nobody on YouTube seemed to be doing that either, and that's a hobby of mine. But that's probably not what most people. I think those videos get like 30 hits versus the thousands of hits that the toy videos get. But if you want to learn hieroglyphics, I have a great series called Doodling with Purpose, where I teach hieroglyphics. So that's the social media aspect of Spector Creative. And then if you head over to spectorcreative.com, which is my company, I formed it last year. Basically, after I left California, my family, we just kind of wanted a better quality of life to raise our daughter, to have more of a yard than a patio, because California is just getting a little tough to live. So we found a beautiful town called Greensboro, North Carolina, which has 5 comic book stores, a dinosaur museum, and a water park, and 300,000 people. So, I like those odds. It's a pretty great place. And I formed Spector Creative as a consulting company to help companies or individuals who have product or ideas for product that they want to bring to market. And it's everything from toys to beauty products to gag gifts. I have kind of clients all over the map as far as products. I have a lot of toy clients, but yeah, basically everything from people who have an idea for a product that they need prototyped or help designing, or they have it done, but they need help getting it to Target or Walmart or Amazon. Or several of my clients, I run full e-tail commerce websites. Like, actually, I'll plug one now, is Avocados Hair, like avocado and dose, like a dose of avocado. Avocadoshair.com. It's a amazing beauty product that was created that great for dry hair. I know probably your audience may mostly be male with the action figures, but people are looking for a great beauty product. Check it out. And that's kind of what I do. So content, e-tail, web creation, and product development and branding, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I do encourage everyone to check out Spector Creative on YouTube. I'm a longtime collector. I made that transition from teen collector to adult collector, and I have learned things about distribution, production that I never really understood, and make store exclusives and how lines are distributed make so much more sense than it ever did to me. We want to thank you, Scott. This is a great conversation. We really had a lot of fun. And, always want to open up that door. Anything else you ever want to talk to us about, you're always welcome on Dissecting Fiction.
That is awesome. I love your guys' angle with it. And, yeah, being able to talk about toys as a medium to tell stories, because I think it's a very underrated medium as far as content. People really look at comic books or movies as the things that have to tell stories. But every time we pose an action figure on a shelf, you're telling a story. If you have Batman fighting Homer Simpson on your shelf, you're telling a story. And a lot of times that story can only be told through toys, because you're probably never going to see, the Homer Simpson versus Batman movie. But, you could do that. And thank you so much for having me. And also, right back at you, any suggestions for videos? I'm always looking for, if people have questions about the toy industry, if I can make a video about it and explain it. It's basically what I've been doing to alleviate boredom during this whole country shutdown thing. That's kind of how it started. I was like, I'm just going to start making YouTube videos in my spare time. So love the suggestions. If anyone has questions about the industry, and if I can answer them, please leave them in the comments on the channel, and I would love to get to videos. So suggestions welcome, and you will be thanked in the video if you give a suggestion.
You heard it, folks. Scott Neitlich, ToyGuru, Spector Creative on YouTube. Thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll talk to you down the road.
Hey, thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's great to meet y'all.
And once again, thanks to Scott Neitlich, the Toy Guru. What an interesting conversation. That was awesome.
Yeah, he was incredibly detailed, and he told us quite a lot. And he was very insightful, actually. It was a pretty interesting conversation.
Yeah, and I assume if you're listening to this one, and you've gotten to this point, you're interested in toys. As always, check out ToyStoreGuide.com. We got to support these small businesses right now. It's a great way to find out which ones are around you and get you connected to them. A lot of those shop owners will be happy to answer any questions you have. Make sure you're supporting all your local businesses right now as well. Comic shops, restaurants, record stores, whatever you've got around you, whoever you can support, do. If you want to keep supporting us, make sure you're following us on all relevant social media. Just type us into Google with whatever one you're looking for. We pop up really easily now. We've been around a while, right, Christian?
Yeah, we have been. It's over a year now.
Yeah, with this podcast, and even longer with the website. So guess what? Google likes us now. And you can find us pretty much anytime you type in Dissecting Fiction. We're going to pop up for you. Anything you want to say this week, Christian? What do we got?
Check out some new stuff from Valve Comics. They released Finger Guns this week. It's been ongoing, but it's a pretty fun adventure. It's kind of a little play on Stranger Things. It's not as straightforward as it seems like at first. And they also released a new Vampire the Masquerade book, which has a game allegedly coming out, which we'll see what happens with that. Because it seems like every game's getting delayed now. Yeah,
I mean, honestly, comic books right now are just a great investment, it seems. I feel like any book, anyone if like the creator sneezed last week, it goes up to like $30-$40. So, buy comics. Comic book stores, man. They need your money. Do it.
Did you guys get your first appearance of Robin King?
I got mine. I also have that Batman 96, baby. Rolling in money right now. I mean, but I won't sell it, and then it'll go down in price, and it won't make any difference. But yeah, I mean, thanks everybody for listening. Another fun interview, and we are committed to keep on bringing these interviews back to you. We're getting really good response, and we want you to hear from creators. I know I was super impressed with Scott's sort of view on how toys tell stories, and that's what we're all about. So. Yep. I'm Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christiaan Neitlich.
And we will see you next week.